Hello, my name is Martin Lackeus. I am a researcher at Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden. I do research in the intersection between entrepreneurship, education, and IT. In this video, I will tell you about a breakthrough we made in 2016 after a number of rather challenging years of intensive action-based research. We ended up discovering a new category in our research, a new kind of tool in education based on IT. We call it social learning media. I will outline what it is, what it isn't, why it could be really useful in education, and how you could do in practice. In the end of the video, I will invite you to test a new SLM tool we have developed through this research. The new tool is called LoopMe. You can read more about it on loopme.io. I will start by contrasting social learning media to its two most common false friends. Categories that people often assume we are talking about, but that we actually are not talking about here. There are of course similarities, but more importantly here, there are also some key differences. While a learning management system is about administering courses and social media is about connecting people, social learning media is about facilitating learning in real time. Learning management systems are used to manage relationships of a many-to-one kind. Social media represents the opposite in terms of one-to-many relationships, where people publicly market their best possible selves to as many as possible. The more outreach, the better. Here, social learning media leans on a one-to-one logic, where teachers assume the role of a trustful mentor engaging in multiple private conversations with students. Learning management systems are often complex and comprehensive. Again, social media is quite the opposite, leaning on an ease of use that triggers an information explosion. This obviously would not work for stressed teachers, so for social learning media, we need to keep the simplicity but increase the relevancy to almost 100%. This is achieved by decreasing quantity in communication, by consciously taking away the viral component of social media. This is also the key reason why social media will never be good social learning media. Superficial and sensation-based communication, such as silly videos going viral, will probably never integrate well into education. In terms of power structures, it is social media that is the odd one out, being a flat arena where anyone can take the lead, which often also happens, leaving the majority of users to be passive consumers of occasional distraction. Learning management and social learning media are instead hierarchical and mandatory for the users. Finally, when it comes to assessment, we see two quite different approaches here. Learning management systems lean firmly on a summative assessment approach, aiming to facilitate the teacher's job of managing hand-ins and summarizing a course into final grades. Social learning media leans more on what is often called formative assessment, which I will explain further in a minute. But before we continue, how can we be so sure that SLM is a different category? Well, in order to advance research in our field, we decided to start building a new IT tool. It was a giant and rather costly experiment into the area of assessing entrepreneurial education, a vexing issue for researchers and practitioners worldwide. The solution we built was named LoopMe, and we will get back to this example of an SLM tool towards the end of this video. One aspect of the tool we built does not even have a counterpart in its two false friends here, and that is quantification of human experience. And this is exactly what makes SLM so useful for assessment purposes. We humans love measuring things, and especially in education, we often focus only on what can be quantified. And experiential education has proven to be very difficult to quantify. Next, we will look at assessment more in detail. Assessment is the most important problem that social learning media can help resolve for teachers on all levels of education. Actually, it can also help researchers to assess what works in education and training. In my research, I have illustrated one of the most fundamental conflicts in education as a dichotomy between traditional and progressive education. This is nothing new. It is in fact a battle that has been going on for hundreds of years. Simplicity is put against complexity. Individual learning of content knowledge is put against the social learning process, triggering student engagement. At its most foundational level, this is a battle between theory and practice. But the trouble doesn't end there. A less acknowledged dimension has triggered almost as much controversy in education: the dichotomy between classroom-based education and field-based education. In my research, I label these four conflicting dimensions: the philosophical playing field of education. My main research focus is actually how entrepreneurship could constitute the foundation for a new educational philosophy, a new kind of rhythm that teachers can dance to in order to move in a more coordinated way between conflicting perspectives. But let's not talk dance now. I've done other videos focusing on that. Here, I rather want to show the difference in difficulty of assessment as we move around the philosophical playing field. In the traditional classroom corner, assessment is easily done through tests and exams. Moving up to the traditional field-based corner, assessment of, for example, study visits and external lectures is also done in a pretty straightforward way, often by means of mandatory presence. Taking the leap down to the progressive classroom corner, assessment is much more of a challenge. Here the challenges are numerous, such as who did what, who got a free ride, how to measure soft skills, etc., etc. And moving up, the final step to the progressive field-based corner, we see assessment as we know it becoming more or less impossible. How to assess an emotional roller coaster. How to capture tacit knowledge gained in real-life, engaging and complex fieldwork, such as in the workplace. That is also the main reason most teachers, sooner or later, moved back down to the lower left corner, back into safe assessment territory. No one ever got fired for choosing that corner. A simplifying dichotomy often used in assessment is that of summative versus formative assessment. Summative assessment is about summarizing an entire course into one simple digit or letter for the purpose of simplifying candidate selection at later stages in life for students. This impacts the student's future profoundly. Formative assessment is rather about what happens here and now, giving feedback that students can learn from in the moment for the purpose of improving learning. But how difficult is formative assessment? Well, let's do the math of formative assessment. Depending on number of students and number of assessed items, assessment can be anything from easy to completely impossible. If we have many students, say 50 or more, the sheer number of assessable items forces us into summative assessment, such as tests and exams. When we reach around 100 accessible items, we simply run out of time if we don't want to work overtime. If we have, say, 33 students, the usual time constraints give us room to be more formative in the assessment, allowing, for example, compulsory lab sessions in addition to the exam. If we have the luxury of working with a group of students as small as 10, we can really get formative. We can coach them individually, we can have classroom discussions as part of assessment, etc. The most extreme case, perhaps a bit hypothetical today, is what I would label Royal Highness education. If you were the teacher in charge of educating the future king, you could probably afford hundreds of different kinds of assessment methods without ever running out of time. A couple of years ago, me and a colleague at Chalmers lost all contact with reality. We designed a course for 37 students where we wanted to go all in on formative assessment. We had diagnostic tests, a pitch day, individual reflections, group hand-ins, video hand-ins, coaching sessions, mandatory contacts with external stakeholders, peer feedback on Facebook, and compulsory workshops. After 3 months, we ended up with 1,543 accessible items. Realizing just how incredibly naive we had been, we said to each other, we are never going to work this way again. But this challenge vexed me for a long time afterwards. There must be a way to avoid the clash between superior assessment quality and teacher time constraints. Today, I believe that I subconsciously searched for the solution to this wicked problem for almost 3 years. But it wasn't until we had developed the LoopMe system for more than 2 years, actually for other purposes than formative assessment, that I realized that we had stumbled upon a solution to the problem. We labeled the solution Social Learning Media, or in short SLM. Let's now look at the SLM solution from a mathematical standpoint. Before the entry of IT, the mathematical limits of assessment were probably as shown here. When learning management systems became standard at most schools and universities, the limit of what was possible moved somewhat. But in order to reach the highest level of formative assessment, where the teacher can assume the role of a trustful mentor, engaging in multiple private conversations with students, something new is required. That is where we see that social learning media could play an absolutely crucial role. By iterating between theory and practice, we generated a fairly long list of requirements of an SLM system. Task logging, mini-reflections, emotional levels, tag counters, social flow, anonymous reflections, chat, file upload, and mini-approval were functions deemed to be absolutely necessary. And this is what it all ended up looking like in the LoopMe application. This system has been deployed together with developed together with a number of thousand students and teachers, and has successively matured over a period of 3 years in a typical entrepreneurial search for what works. Now we are more or less done, and the time has come to draw conclusions from the research process and its outcomes. The list of what can now be easily assessed by teachers without turning their everyday life as a teacher into hell has become very long. By using social learning media, teachers can work in a very different way than before, and this opens up for a number of pedagogical developments that were previously highly sought after and desired, but also highly unrealistic from a practical point of view for all but the most overambitious teachers. Here are some of the learning environments where we have used social learning media to test it, develop it further, and see how it works in practice. Hundreds of teachers have used the LoopMe system for formative assessment of thousands of students of all ages, from young kids experiencing action-based pedagogy, perhaps for the first time, to adolescents learning by starting a mini company through Young Enterprise, to experienced teachers learning about entrepreneurial pedagogy in further education and reflecting around it in LoopMe. It seems that SLM works at its best when teachers practice action-based pedagogy in different ways. This means that those teachers that will benefit the most from SLM are those who want to apply a more engaging pedagogy with their students. Finally, going back to the dichotomy between summative and formative assessment, what we now have is a way to go beyond the usual separation between these two different approaches and instead upgrade summative assessment by mixing them. Susan Brookhart is one of rather few scholars having written about this. She calls for further research, and this video is a response to that call. What we have found is that social learning media can be viewed as a system. As input, we have goals and themes. The process builds on students' decisive moments, transformed into a manageable flow of information relevant for learning. As output, we see personal growth, but also organizational growth when SLM is used as a tool to support and direct, for example, school development projects. In fact, we have so far only scratched the surface of what we can do once we have SLM in our everyday toolbox. To facilitate real-time formative assessment is an example of what we have labeled formative dialogue. But SLM can also be used for impact assessment, research and development. The data that is generated in the system is highly relevant for research purposes. SLM can also be used for systematic quality work and for collegial learning. The future will have to tell what opportunities SLM opens up for education, and perhaps also for work life. So that's all I had to share this time. I'd like to finish off by clarifying that this has been a truly collective effort. Here are all the key partners and key people, and thank you all for taking part in this action research journey. If somebody wants to read more about LoopMe or see what social learning media can look like, just go to loopme.io, read more, and why not, register as a user. If you use the invite code UJA646, you will get directly to a group containing 3 simple and fun tasks for you to explore related to SLM. I will follow your progress with these 3 tasks. All reflections go to me and only to me. You can also read more about my research at my research blog and web, vcplist.com. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.